obviously, as you know, I get interviewed on a show called Money Talks as well, and I've repeated this several times. We going into a sovereign default. Now, which country defaults first? We really don't know. Maybe it's on the outside because people are talking about the US dollar collapsing, and I don't think so. It's a deep and liquid market for the US dollar, and everyone needs them for now, at least till the BRICS comes about. But my view has always been it's either Japan going first or a European country, because as you said earlier, when they had bonds, they were the two, and Switzerland included, were who went to negative interest rates. And as you've highlighted to our audience as well, when you've had bonds sitting at negative interest rates, obviously the price goes up because it's inversely correlated. And now that the central banks have started increasing interest rates because of inflation, obviously the bond value goes down. And you just gave us a recent example of 85% in Liz trusts and pension funds. And I've mentioned before to my listeners on my shows is your insurance companies also. And this other wealth funds are holding government bonds because they were seen as the safest asset.
It's
Not that you mentioned this.
Sorry to interrupt, Farzin. It's worse than that. It's not just that they perceive bonds to be, pension funds perceive bonds to be a reasonable investment. They're forced to own them by the regulator. That's certainly the case here in the UK, and I suspect it's the case internationally. Because I remember going back to the global financial crisis of 2008, and around that time, I think I'm correct in saying that the Dutch, there was a Dutch pension scheme. I think it was a glass blowers union, but either way, there was a small Dutch pension scheme, and they had holdings in gold. And the Dutch regulator says, no, you have to sell this risky gold and replace it with low risk, zero risk Dutch state loans, DSLs, or Dutch government bonds. And the pension fund took them to court, and my belief is that they won that case. In other words, they told the regulator to go play in the traffic. This is the problem, that when you've got heavily indebted, so this is really getting us to the essence of the problem. My thesis would be that there is now so much government debt in the world, it can never possibly be paid back. So the question is, for all of those governments, includes the US, the UK, most of the EU, Japan, China, it's pretty much everybody, with the possible exception of some Gulf states and maybe one or two well-run Asian economies. But by and large, this is a global problem. If you accept that thesis, then there are only three possible options. Option one is that you try and engineer enough economic growth to keep the debt serviced. That's what Trump's trying to do. He may pull it off, but because he's also now apparently added another $4 trillion to an already unpayable $37 trillion of national debt, I think he's probably screwed the pooch on that one. The second option is that you default. Now, you won't call it a default. You'll call it something like a restructuring or a debt jubilee. But the bottom line is we live in a credit-based economy. If any major government defaults on its debt, that is Armageddon, because you've got 2008 to the power of 10. So let's park the default option. What does that leave? That leaves option number 3, which happily is the wrong word, coincidentally is also the option that every heavily indebted government throughout all of recorded history has resorted, which is inflation. You inflate it away. So people are massively missing the point when it comes to what inflation really is. Inflation is not, first and foremost, a rise in the price of goods and services. That's a second order effect. Inflation, first and foremost, like Milton Friedman says, is an increase in the money supply. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon. Or in the words of Ludwig von Mises, who's one of the most celebrated so-called Austrian school economists, inflation is not a disease or something like an act of God. Inflation is a policy. Inflation is being quite deliberately baked into the system because it's the only way these governments can pay their way now. In other words, they won't default on their debt. They'll just pay you back with devalued money. And that's been the case since the Federal Reserve was established in 1913. The purchasing power of the US dollar after the Fed was established is to try and protect the value of the dollar. It's one of its mandates. The purchasing power of the dollar has fallen by something like 98 or 99%. Good job, Fed.